The best way to listen to the best of the week is on the Relevant Radio app. Free and always free. Download and share the #1 free Catholic app today in the App Store.
I was reading a couple of articles on Teen Vogue today, and I shouldn't be surprised that I am always enlightened to some of the latest trends in terminology when I do so, because this is what the youngest generation's being exposed to. You're not just talking about teenagers. We are talking about preteens, middle school kids. This is what they're seeing on social media and what is normative to them. And something really popped out to me. I was reading an article on Teen Vogue about how Gen Z are ditching social media, but it's all talk. They're claiming they're ditching social media because they don't like Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, allowing for an increase in free speech and less censorship, or should I say targeting of people of faith or who have different ideas, often that are true. Because ultimately what it showed was that Gen Zers are all talk, and they're commenting on how it's not even possible to ditch social media. But then we get to this testimony of a 23-year-old woman from England who's venting about how she can't quit social media platforms because she needs to grow her fan base, which is what every seemingly Gen Zer thinks today. This is the only way to have a business. I have to have a social media presence, which you do. If you're an entrepreneur or you're leading a company, you have to have that presence. It shows a little bit of that pressure that's on them. But then I came to this, which is the real topic today. This 23-year-old woman, she was using she, her pronouns, because you've got to be careful today, right? She labeled herself saying, this is really hard, especially on social media, as a, quote, queer neurodivergent person. Queer neurodivergent person. What on earth does that mean? I had to Google it, and thanks to Google AI, a queer neurodivergent person is what you would guess, someone who identifies as both two things. One, queer. So in other words, they're not heterosexual. They're not outright calling themselves homosexual or cisgender, not even heteroromantics. You got to be careful with terminologies. They're sticking with the queer, and then neurodivergent is the second part. So she's a queer neurodivergent person, as she says. In that neurodivergent side refers to having ADHD and or autism. And I looked at that, and all I could think of was how I seem to hear from Gen Zers every time I meet or encounter one, that they're throwing these labels on themselves. Perhaps not as confusing as that. More often than not, it's usually, oh, well, I have ADHD, or oh, I have OCD. Or Gen Z also calls themselves identity nomads because they're always changing their digital identity, their persona, their facade. In fact, Gen Z, and to be clear, those are who were born between 1997 and 2012. So as of this year, they're between the ages of 13 and 28. Gen Z talks about how they have a fluid sense of identity that changes and can change, that isn't associated with traditions, values, or faith. But meanwhile, as they're rejecting identity, they are engaging in the worst identity politics of all. Perpetually labeling themselves. BPD, it's bipolar, dyslexic, introvert. OCD and ADHD seem to be the ones I hear the most, but it actually goes further than that. I can't tell you how often I've met a Gen Z, whether it's been in the workplace, on the streets, a friend of one of my siblings, Gen Zers, you name it, and they're so quick to say in the first couple of sentences of speaking to a complete stranger, something such as, I'm an only child, my dad abandoned me, and I have ADHD. Holy smokes, those are real wounds, real challenges. And I'm always startled by these circumstances because they happen all the time with a Gen Z. Real wounds. And so on one side, it could be holding and carrying a victim mentality. On the other side, it could just be wearing your reality on your sleeve of what you've experienced. Sometimes it can be used as an excuse, at least in the workplace, for the output being what it is, or an excuse for behavior within a particular circumstance, interpersonal circumstance. But here's where I think that we need to step into this space. There's a reason that Gen Z labels themselves as something, whether it's a diagnosis, a wound. It's because they do not know what their identity is. Even those who have grown up with faith, that faith has been stymied and stomped out by the culture and their peers. Why is this important? Because identity and mission override any disorder or diagnosis or wound from family of origin that we may experience. And it's centered at the end of the day in God. Our identity must be centered in God because it's God-given. It's God-centered. We are made in His image, in His likeness. We are made for love, and we can only do that because He gave us free will to freely choose to love. And that's what gives us such value, is that God created us for love, but He's not forcing us. He didn't make us robots. And with that love, He gives us the ability to love Him. And even further, He gives so much to us. He gives us His church and the sacraments, and where grace can abound in our lives and transform any circumstance. Yes, we can have different diagnoses and wounds that we have to cope with and heal with and overcome. But we learn how to adapt and heal. And truly, God's grace transforms us. And our identity in Him elevates any label we could place on ourselves. And we should have a greater sense of value for ourselves and help to pass that on to the next generation who has lost that in this identity crisis we live in. You can join me and listen on the Relevant Radio app to Trending with Timmerie live each weekday at 6 p.m. Central. Thanks for listening.